going to read this morning from Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, and then later in the sermon I'll make reference to Genesis chapter 2. These are the two chapters that deal with the creation story. The section in chapter 2 we'll look at later has to do with how God brings man and woman together in marriage. But these two verses, verses 26 and 27 of chapter 1, have to do with the creation of man and woman. Verse 26 says, "Then God said, 'Let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground.' So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God created he them, male and female he created them." I remember years ago seeing an interview on the old Merv Griffin show. Some of you may remember that show. His guest was Lucille Ball. This was not too long before she died. She was on in years at the time, but they were talking about how things had changed, how America had changed, all of the problems that the country was facing. And I remember he asked her the question, "What do you think is wrong with the country?" And then he said also, "What's wrong with our children? Why do you think the homes, our families are falling apart?" And without hesitation, she answered, "The problem is that Dad is missing. Things are falling apart because our dads are gone." And by that she meant that there were a lot of homes then who just didn't have dads in them. And that's even more so today. And so what I want to talk to you about today is the place of the dad in the home, how God designed the home so that men were an essential part of it, and also talk a little bit about some of the differences between men and women. The verse I want to call your attention to that we read this morning is verse 27, that men and women were both created in the image of God, male and female he created them, the Bible says. God created both, men and women. There is a tendency today to kind of overlook, to downplay the difference between the sexes, but they are pronounced. And what the Bible is calling our attention to in the very first chapter of the Bible is that the differences are by God's design, that God created us specifically to be men and women. Now, people who study such things tell us that the differences between the sexes, between male and female, are apparent from very early on. You see that we raised two girls and a boy, and so we could see that in the home. Girls tend to mature, for example, much more quickly than boys do. You take the average 17-year-old girl, let's say, most 17-year-old girls could function as adults if they needed to. You could take them, place them in a home where they needed to be the woman of the house and they could do it. Most 17-year-old boys are just overgrown children. You know, they're physically the same age, but they're entirely different. Men and women have a different, instinctively a different nurturing capacity, I'll call it. And you see it when they become parents, how men and women parent differently in this regard. I was reading an article this week in ESPN magazine. ESPN is a TV sports network, and they have a monthly magazine they publish. And there's a great article in there this month about baseball players from Latin America who've come to America to play baseball. Now, if you're a baseball fan, you know that there are just, hundreds of ball players, Major League ball players who've come from Central and South America, a lot of Latin ball players. But this article was focusing on some of the obstacles that they faced along the way as they left their native countries and came here to play ball. And, they don't come from there to here and immediately play in the major leagues. They go into the minor league system, and so they're not playing in places like New York and Los Angeles. They're playing in Bakersfield, California, and Laurel, Mississippi, and on and on. So they were talking to the players about what was it like to come here, go to the minor leagues, and not making much money, not knowing the language, different food, and all that. And one player they were talking to, who's a big star now, but he was talking about when he first came to this country, he didn't speak English at all, He was assigned to some, minor league team way out in the sticks. They had told him through an interpreter that they had an apartment for him to live in, him and a couple of other players, and they gave him $60. It was kind of an advance against his salary. Now, he assumed, since they were giving him an apartment and they told him the apartment was furnished, he assumed there was going to be food in the apartment, the refrigerator. They were giving him the $60 to go buy food, but he didn't know that. So he says he took his $60 and he went out and bought a brand new pair of shoes with it. And when he got to his apartment and opened the fridge, it was empty. And he said for 3 days he didn't eat because he didn't have any food. Now, this guy was from Venezuela. So he called home and his mom answered. Now, what do you think the mom said? She started crying when he told her, "Oh, Mom, I don't have any money and I've been in this apartment for 3 days and we don't have any food and I haven't eaten in 3 days." She started crying on the phone and said, "Come home, precious. You don't have to live that way. Come home, there's plenty of food here." Well, while this is going on, the dad grabs the phone out of the mom's hand and says, "Look, you wanted to play baseball? Well, you're playing baseball now. Put your pants on, go to work tomorrow, and stop whining." Which he did. And he's a big star now. Now, which of them was right? Well, they both were. Because they both are parenting according to the gifts and design that God has placed in them. He needed somebody to sympathize with him and to express that concern and that sympathy, and that's what the mom gave him. He also needed him, what we used to call in my generation, he needed a swift kick in the pants. And the dad gave him that. If all he had gotten was what the dad gave him, that would have been too harsh. But if all he got was what the mom gave him, that would have been too soft. But when you put them together, he got exactly what he needed to develop as a human being, but also to progress in his career. The temperament of men and women, and I'm just going to do one or two more of these. I could talk all day on this. But I used to hear a lot growing up about how women talk more than men. That's a scientific fact. That's not just a casual observation people make. Harvard University has studied this. It shows that early on, even the sounds that women are just more verbal. They develop verbal skills more quickly. I hear my little granddaughters now putting sentences together. The little 2-year-old Emma, taking the complicated parts of grammar and putting them together to make sentences. The sentences don't always come out, perfectly correct grammatically, but all the parts are there. She's already putting all of that together. They say that most boys, up until about the age of 3, 60% of the sounds they make aren't even words. They're just sounds. The difference verbally, it persists into adulthood. According to Harvard University, the average woman speaks over 25,000 words a day. The average man speaks about 10,000. So imagine that in the home. The average woman, when asked the question, how much time do you need to spend in conversation with your husband a day? You know what the average woman said, or what the average time was? 45 minutes to an hour every day. The average man, when asked the same question, how much time do you need to spend in conversation with your wife, said 15 to 20 minutes twice a week. Imagine. Mary and I have been married for 39 years. We dated 4 years before that. We've known each other even before that. I am still amazed at the differences between us that just come from being man and woman. But what I want you to get from all this is not just what the differences are, and I just touched on a few of them. What I want you to get is that they are by God's design. Neither one is right, neither one is wrong. They're both by God's design. He created us to be the way we are. Now, there are a lot of what I think are dangerous attitudes developing within our society toward men. It's kind of commonplace now to think of almost all male characteristics as being negative, that they're bad. It's kind of frowned upon now for men to have organizations where they gather together with just men. You know, we have a women's club here in Baldwin Park. I think that's a great idea. I had just assumed that women sometimes just need to be with other women, to not have men around. And men need that too. I've been playing golf with the same group of guys for about 12 or 13 years. There are no women. It's just men. And we love it. And it's not that we're hostile to women. It's just good sometimes for guys to get together with just other guys. But more and more society's kind of frowning upon that. We don't think that's a good idea. We're getting to the point where the behavior of men and women seems less and less distinct, more and more interchangeable, right? You see men kind of dressing like women, some anyway, and women dressing like men or acting that way. Gloria Steinem had a great quote when she said, "Some of us are becoming the men we want to marry." And she's right. I see less of that. And more we're seeing men kind of disappearing from vocations that used to be traditionally male vocations. Now, that's okay to a degree. For example, about half the people in med school right now are women. About 40% of the seminary students in America are women. And when you consider that there are some fundamentalist seminaries that won't allow any women, that makes the number go up even higher. Mary has told me that sometimes when she'll go to like shop for lingerie, there'll be a man working there in the women's lingerie department. We just have this notion that men and women are interchangeable. Now the problem with this, with men kind of disappearing from the traditional roles, is that it's also happening in the home, that men are disappearing from the home. So you've got boys now often being raised in homes where there's no man in the home, and their doctor is a woman, their teachers are women. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor, only 3% of kindergarten teachers are men, 18% of elementary school teachers and middle school are women, or the opposite, only 18% are men, and only 42% of high school teachers are men. Altogether, from kindergarten through 12th grade, 75% of the teachers in America are women. So you have boys growing up in homes with no dads, and then their doctor's a woman, their teachers are women, and on and on. Most men, or males, will grow up in America, about 75% of them, and have very little contact with men across their lives. In the homes, it's happening even more so. I read a Christian book once where the thesis of the book was that dads are nice to have around, but moms are essential. And I just wanted to rip the book up when I read that, because according to the Word of God, dads are just as essential as moms are. They fulfill a different role, but it's a definite role and an important role. But listen to this. Nationwide right now, about 40% of the children born in America are born into homes with no dad. No dad in the home. In some communities, it's 75% of the children born in the cities are born to homes with no dad. So yeah, what Lucille Ball said is right, I think. That a lot of what's wrong in America is that the dads are missing in action. So God created us to be the way we are. And when we develop this notion that somehow men aren't necessary, that they're nice to have, but they're not necessary, we're deluding ourselves. Men are absolutely essential to the plan of God, not just for society, but for the home. And so we see in the book of Genesis, the second passage I was going to mention to you this morning in chapter 2, is that God joins Adam and Eve together in marriage. He creates them not just unique, but for each other. They are designed for each other. It's a staple of comedians since time began, I suppose, to joke about marriage. I was reading recently, someone quipped about, remember the old Andy Griffith show? Have all of you seen that? I'd never thought about this, and I've been watching the show for decades, but he said, have you ever noticed that almost everyone on the Andy Griffith show is single? He said Andy is single, Barney is single, Aunt Bee is single, Clara Edwards is a widow, Helen Crump is single, Thelma Lou is single. He said the only one on the show who's married is Otis, and he stays drunk. Well, that's true, I guess, for that show. But it's also true that marriage is created by God as a beautiful gift, especially for our benefit. Since about the 60s, the societal view of marriage has been increasingly that it's not really necessary, that just living together is the same thing as getting married. And I think that's a mistake, that there is something important to making that commitment and having a piece of paper that legalizes it. There's something essential to that. When God creates these two human beings, he goes through what is in essence a wedding ceremony where he joins them together. And this is Genesis 2 verses 18 through 24. They are joined together in marriage and told that they are for one another. They form a relationship of, in a sense, dependence upon one another. A complementary relationship where they each receive something distinct from the other. The passage says where Adam says to God, of all the things you created for me, this is before he was created, there's nothing in your creation that I find that is suitable for me. And if you think about it, at that point, there is no sin in mankind. He has what we assume to be an unhindered fellowship with God, yet he's still lonely. There's still something in him that is lacking. Even in this unhindered relationship with God, there's still something that he needs. And God says to him, I will create a companion for you. The King James translates it as, I will create an helpmeet for you. And if you don't know what helpmeet is, that's because it's really not an English word. It was sort of a made-up English word to translate a word that we don't have in English. We don't have a corresponding word to it, because even in Hebrew, the language of the Old Testament, it's an unusual word. It's what we call a compound word, two words put together. But the two words have sort of opposite meanings. And that's why it's so difficult to translate. The English word companion sort of comes close to it, but it misses out on one of the ideas. What the idea is in Hebrew is God is saying to Adam, I'm going to create someone who is like you, and yet who is different from you. It's hard to translate that into one word, isn't it? We don't really have a word for that. But when God creates Eve, that's what she is created to be. Are men and women alike? Yes, in fundamental, key, important ways. For example, men and women are more like each other than they are to, say, any other animal created in creation, right? But are men and women different? Yes, in important, key, and fundamental ways, and it's by design. And so God creates man and woman for one another, and he creates marriage for their mutual benefit. Marriage, for example, is the absolute best vehicle for child rearing. In parenting, two heads are better than one. You don't have all the wisdom you need as a single parent, and frankly, you don't have it all as two parents either. But at least you have a better chance. When two people are putting their heads together to figure things out, you've got a better chance than you have just one person doing it. So two heads are better than one, and there's supreme value in having a male and female perspective in parenting. I've had this debate for years now with those who say, for example, about same-sex marriage, that it doesn't really matter. Two men can be good parents just like a man and a woman, or two women can. And I'm not denying that. Of course, two men can be good parents, and of course, two women can be good parents. But the ideal is a man and a woman, because they both bring different perspectives into parenting. They have different thoughts, like the example I gave you earlier of the Venezuelan baseball player. What he got from the mom and what he got from the dad were both important. There are some things that women just can't do with male children, for example. The primary one being to model male behavior. A lot of parenting isn't about teaching verbally, it's through example. And so to an extent, what children learn from you is more caught than taught. And women can't model male behavior for little boys, just like men can't model female behavior for little girls. So it's not just that two heads are better than one, that's true, but it's also the diversity that male and female parents bring into parenting. It's all by design. So it's the ideal vehicle for child rearing. It's designed to prevent us from loneliness. Adam, as I mentioned, he had this unhindered fellowship with God, but he still needed a companion. Marriage is places us in a relationship of equals where we each have distinct roles. Notice that both sexes in our passage from Genesis 1, verse 27, they're both created in the image of God, and there is an implied equality in there. Men and women are absolutely, fundamentally equal in the eyes of God, and yet not the same, different. And our differences are by design. Male and female created he them. Masculinity is a gift from God. Femininity is a gift from God for us. God made us to be complementary in our needs and desires. And I'll just give you a couple of examples here. As a man, I have a desire to protect my wife. I didn't have to go to school to learn how to do that. I didn't have to read a book to want to do that. It's just in me. She has a desire to be protected by me. You know, if there's a noise in the night, we can't identify. I don't wake up my wife and say, Mary, go check on the noise. You know, get the gun and go look in the house. There could be a prowler. Nor would she want to do that. When we lived in Argentina one night, this was when their economy had crashed, and there were literally bands, large groups of people who went out into the streets with torches, and they were looting stores and they were looting houses. And I was set to go on a trip. As I recall, I think I was about to take a trip across country for some mission meeting. And this was when, Lisa, when we lived in Jose Manuel, our first year about in the country, and we could hear them down the street. So I picked up the phone and called the mission president and said, I ain't going. These people are close enough down the street that I can hear them. I'm not leaving my wife and children. And they didn't like that. They got upset with me. You know, you're supposed to be here, you're part of the program and all that. And I said, tough luck. I'm not going. I'm not leaving my family to go do mission business. Now, I didn't have to think about that. Nobody taught me. It's just in me. That was created. If the situation had been reversed, and say Mary was set to go somewhere, she wouldn't have wanted to go. She would have wanted to stay home with the family, but she wouldn't have felt the need to protect me. Like, oh, I can't leave you. You know, I can't leave you unprotected. It's different, and that's all by God's design. Another is that the male and female thing. You know, God created woman with a desire to nurture, and men have a desire to be nurtured by their wives. Both, it meets a need in both of us. Years ago, I gave Mary a card. I don't remember if it was for our anniversary or for Mother's Day, but it was a great card. I guess it was written, it was for a guy to give to, say, an older woman who had meant a lot in his life. And on the front of the card, it said, "You've been like a mother to me." And I gave that to Mary, what was it, for our anniversary? Mother's Day, okay, yeah. Now, it was funny, and I meant it partly as a joke, but it was also partly true. It was also partly true that over the years of our marriage, she had done that, had been nurturing and supporting and loving like a mother does. And so it was only partially a joke. It was also partially true. It's a desire that God places in women, and they not only have the desire to do it, but men have the desire to receive it. So again, I could go on and on with these, but those are just two examples. Things that God places in us to be used not just in isolation, but to be used in the home. So we are like we are by God's design. God created marriage for our benefit, and He wants us to use all of these great traits that he has given us to use in the home to be a blessing to one another, to our children, and to the community. And so I close today by saying, men, be godly men in your home first and foremost. If you fail as a dad, it doesn't matter what else you succeed in life if you fail there. So be a good dad in the home, be a good example to your children, be the dad and husband that your wife needs you to be and that your children need you to be. God bless you in that effort. I think it's the most important thing that we do as men. I want us to sing just the first stanza of God Give Us Christian Homes. I think it's